This podcast is part of the Big Heads Media Podcast Network. Go to bigheadsmedia.com for more great podcasts.
You are listening to In a City Like Yours, a semi-monthly podcast featuring interesting people with interesting life stories. This podcast may contain language and/or subject matter not suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
I'm your host, Michael G. Moore. Please visit our website at inacitylikeyours.com. That's INACITYLIKEYOURS.com for links to our social media, all popular podcast platforms, and links of interest pertaining to all episodes. On this episode, I chat with Kennedy, the creator of the audio drama Magus Elgar. Kennedy grew up living on a sailboat in Florida. At the age of 8, his parents invited him and his sister to join them in sailing around the world, a trip that would eventually take 1.5 years. Join us as Kennedy reminisces about his childhood adventures and weaves a humorous tale of living on a sailboat without seeing land for weeks at a time and dealing with the boredom. Here is Kennedy's story.
Hi, my name is Kennedy Phillips. I'm 30 years old, going on 31. I live in Lakewood, California, and I'm about to tell you a story about my life. It requires a bit of prefacing because I did not have a traditional upbringing with my family. I grew up in Florida on a sailboat. I lived there for about 12 years. It was a 50-foot Gulf Star called Das Ein. Das Ein was a play on the German phrase Das Ein, but my dad always introduced it to me as if it was just one singular concept, which to him meant being one with the universe, or being one with the world. It was a sense of some kind of Buddhist state of belonging, I suppose. In 1997, I was about 8 years old. I'd been going to elementary school for a while, and we didn't really move around a considerable amount. We'd go on day sails and stuff. My parents would work as home health nurses and go to hospitals and other things like that. But one day, my sister and I were asked to come into my parents' bedroom in the stern of the ship. They sat us down, and it seemed like it was going to be this big, serious thing. I didn't really know what was going to happen at the time. I mean, if I was at the age that I was, that I am now, I would assume that it's kind of like walking in on somebody about to tell you that they've just gotten cancer or something. There was a gravitas in the room. I asked my dad, well, what's going on? And he said, your mother and I want to take Das Ein and sail around the world. This would take about 1 to 2 years, and we'd basically be leaving everything. We'd still have the ship, but we didn't think it would be right for you to feel obligated to come with us. So if you say yes, we'll go along together and make a whole family thing of it. If you say no, well, we can leave you with grandma or one of our friends or an aunt or something in the time that we're gone. And you can continue life as usual. I mean, I wasn't going to say no. Even at that age, you knew it was like a once-in-a-lifetime chance. My sister and I couldn't have said yes any faster. So we agreed, and we were pulled out of school for about a year and a half, gathered all of our supplies, and we joined the Round the World Rally 97-98 to travel all around the world and end at Lisbon, where we would attend the World Expo 98. And that was the start of our story. It was kind of intense, a little bit surreal, to be honest. You wouldn't expect something like this would kind of happen in your life, especially not at this age. And it just kind of fell into my lap. I mean, like my dad put it in my lap, my mom put it in my lap, but still, in my lap it was.
I can imagine being that young, what an adventure what's going on in your mind.
Oh yeah, it was going to be the summer that never ended, just going off on adventures, doing incredible things and stuff. I had no bearing on how difficult it was going to be. Because, when you're a kid, you just think about, like, all the fun stuff that's going to happen. You don't think about, well, you might not have enough food, or you might not get fuel, or a storm might hit, or people might try and attack your ship, et cetera, et cetera. The first time that I started to realize how dangerous it could have been, we were heading to Panama. It was the second trip, or the second leg between us to Jamaica, then to Panama. We had only been sailing for about 2 weeks, maybe 3, and a really bad storm hit us. The waves were like blotting out the horizon. There was just the amount of rocking going up and down. It was like a slow motion roller coaster. It was just thoroughly unpleasant. We were all huddled in the cockpit, harnesses attached to like this big metal rung next to the steering wheel. And at one point, we got hit by a stray wave, a rogue wave, that knocked our ship sideways. The water just kind of flooded everything in the cockpit. I lost my balance. You kind of had to brace yourself in the cockpit just for something like that. But the way that sailing vessels and most ships are designed, they usually have a lead bottom so that the weight brings it back upright. But if we had been knocked an inch or two more, or a foot or two more, we would have capsized, and that would have been it. We would have been screwed. It was a lucky break, but I remember when I was 8 years old, looking at the rest of my family, this young child puts a smile on his face, absolutely beaming, feeling this adrenaline rush, and I said, "Can we do that again?" Maybe it was a coping mechanism, maybe it was just me being ignorant about it or something like that, but I think I was starting to understand that even though that this stuff was all dangerous, this was the time that I was going to feel the most alive for a long time. By being alive, there were some difficult legs. There were some difficult moments. Not much after we get to Panama, we start heading to Ecuador. That was all fine, but going from Ecuador to Galapagos, another storm hit and we lost our steering, which is the worst thing to happen. I think it had something to do with the chain in the engine room that controlled the steering wheel to the rudder. But my dad and my mom are very, very intelligent people, and they can think on their feet. They took a giant monkey wrench and attached it to the top of the rudder, and they attached some pulleys to that giant monkey wrench and tied it up into some winches to make an impromptu steering wheel out of 2 ropes and a monkey wrench. It was sad because they could not sleep until they got back to do that, because the steering the rudder happened to be underneath their bed, and they had to rip apart their bed just to get at it.
This is Brew Crime, a craft beer and true crime podcast.
I'm Mike.
I'm Beck.
And I'm Nina.
And we're your hosts.
We pair a true crime story with a craft beer.
That Nina will probably hate.
Yeah, probably.
Whatever. You can find our show on all your favorite podcast apps, and if you can't find it, contact us, and we'll try and change that.
We can be found at brewcrime.com, or on Twitter at brewcrime, on Facebook at brewcrime, or if you want to go to our group, it's group/brewcrime on Facebook, or on Instagram at Pacific Beer Chat.
Join us as we discuss the horrible crimes that surround us and try not to giggle.
The problem with this kind of story is that you've been away from it for so long that if you want to just talk unabated about it for so long, a lot of the memories tend to jumble up together. Certain details might get missed or something like that. I was pretty young at the time, but there's so many vivid memories. Experiencing Panama for the first time was really exciting because going through the giant blocks with a bunch of other ships, 8, 9, 10, 11 times the size of the ship I grew up on, was just daunting. And then you finally get to the other side and the water is just different. Going from the Atlantic to the Pacific, the water is like colder, it's darker, it's honestly fascinating. It doesn't seem like something that would be anticipated. Like, why would the Atlantic look different than the Pacific? At least to a kid's brain. But when it happened, I was looking at my parents just like wide-eyed, being like, why is it so much darker here? My dad argued it was because the water was deeper, but I mean, it's not going to be deeper everywhere, right? But like a couple of points of significance for me was going to Galapagos was really a unique experience. Getting there takes a lot of effort because the middle of nowhere, like usually you got to get there by boat. I'm not sure if they have an airport. I assume they do now. But I never actually saw any planes go by when I was there. Now, the thing about Galapagos is that there are some pros, but there are definitely some cons. The first con that I remembered was I woke up one morning when we first got there. You kind of have to leave the garbage on the deck so that you, like, when you go to throw it out, you can't just toss it overboard because that's all kinds of wrong. Instead, you have to go into town and dump it out that way. So when we left the garbage bag out overnight, we hadn't anticipated the amount of bugs that were going to be around. The bag had moved about 6 inches from where we put it, from the amount of bugs that had broken into it and are starting to move around inside of it. And these bugs are huge. They are massive. I would remember because at one point while I was in Galapagos, a wasp landed on my knee, and it was the size of my kneecap. There was a local kid that was with me that we were playing and stuff, and he said, like, don't move. And I don't think I had the energy in me to move because I was completely petrified. It flew off, and I'm like, oh, good, yay. And the kid, like, cheers and stuff, and then it lands on my shoulder.
Oh, no.
It's like, oh, this is even worse. I don't know how I didn't get stung, but there you go. But yeah, the cons are just the big bugs. But Galapagos was so vibrant, so fascinating. The colors are just totally different from anywhere else in the world. It's almost like you had existed in a desaturated plane of existence your entire life, and it just opened your eyes for the very first time. Now, I could wax on poetics about this place all the time, but what was fun was that, like, we got to go around and explore and do all sorts of things. We got to spend, like, maybe about a week there, just to soak in the place and get to know people. So we would go to these beaches where they had sea lions. And I remember we got video recordings of us hanging out with these sea lions, and they were just so chill around people. They were just taking naps or swimming or other things like that. Some of the other sailing vessels that were doing the trip with us, some of the crew would go out and surf on this in this little beach. At one point, we had gotten a guide to take us to Sleeping Lion Rock. Sleeping Lion Rock is this large, massive boulder out in just about an eighth of a mile out of the mainland, and it resembles a giant sleeping lion, hence the name. But what's really fascinating about it is that you can't climb up on it. Like, there is no way that you can get on there unless you had rock climbing gear. But that's not the reason why you go there. The reason why you go there is because underneath Sleeping Lion Rock is this sprawling ecosystem of coral reefs and various types of exotic fish and even a couple of small sharks. And it would just go down forever. Because, I mean, out in the Galapagos, it's just like these two tall mountains or whatever, and then just an endless abyss of nothing. So this pillar that goes down thousands of feet, teeming with life, and also little phytoplankton that nip at you, and it kind of feels like you got like little static shocks all over your body. That was fun. But when we finished doing the snorkeling and swimming around there, we started to drive back, and the engine on the tour boat broke down right next to another beach of sea lions, and they saw us and immediately all jumped in the water and started swimming rapidly towards us to play. So we're like, well, let's make the most of this, and we started swimming around with them. And I remember one particular moment during this that was really funny. Was we had a video camera from one of the other crew members who had left their camera on record on the boat. While the guide was working on the engine, the sea lion jumps up onto the boat. He doesn't pay attention to it because he thinks it's a tourist or whatever. And the sea lion starts poking his butt with his nose. Guy turns around, the sea lion has already jumped in the water and is barking at him. He turns back, gets back to work. Sea lion jumps back in the boat, starts poking his butt again. This happens like one or two more times before the sea lion jumps back up in the boat and the guy turns around and goes, "Bah!" And the sea lion yelps and falls into the water. Of course, it wasn't all smiles that day because one of our friends, if I recall, his name was Scott. He was on, I can't remember the vessel that he was sailing on, but what I do remember was that at some point he got a sea urchin embedded into his leg, around the inner thigh, which is just unfortunate. What sucks about that is that you can't pull that thing out traditionally. Like, if you try pulling it out by your hands, it's just not going to work. But what you do have to do is you need to introduce ammonia or an acidic pH balance to the sea urchin. For those of you scientifically minded, I think you know where I'm going with this. For those that don't, he had to pee on it, which was a little embarrassing because he had to decide whether to do it immediately or save his wife the embarrassment and wait until he got home to do it.
With the sea urchin in his leg.
With the sea urchin in his leg. He chose the former. But I mean, wouldn't you? Like, wouldn't anybody? It's a good thing that he had, the stress of the situation had him ready to go.
So what was your next stop?
Marquesas. Marquesas was quite different from from Galapagos, mostly because while there weren't as many like sea lions or anything like that, the bugs were much larger. Not as vibrant, but much larger. And I'm not sure if it was Galapagos or Marquesas, but at one point my dad got fed up with it. He was tired of the bugs. He was tired of the insects, and he went into the store to try and see if he could find some kind of spray or fumigation to deal with it. And he found a can of spray that is, without a doubt, illegal in the States. It is not something that messes around. So he called out my mom, my sister, and I to come out of the boat, and he went in and sprayed it, and you just hear shh. All the bugs died instantly in the boat, and we spent months, literally months, finding these dead bugs all over the boat.
Give me a sense of time. You know, you spend a lot of time in the ocean, open ocean, then you spend a little bit of time visiting a port. Is that how it generally works?
The way that the timing would work is sailing out at sea, nobody really prepares you for the amount of boredom that'll come up. Because there is nothing out there. There's no land, there's no any vibrant visuals for long periods of time. It's just you, the boat, and nothing else. Sometimes you get a little bit of stimulation by seeing maybe like if it's windy and like some waves are forming out at sea, but that's about it. To counteract that, you spend a little bit of time on port, just like a couple of days, just so you can get your supplies, get time to relax, get time to recuperate, because you end up spending very long legs just trying to get there. You're not just wandering around out there. You don't have the time for that. For example, going from Ecuador to Marquesas took us about 2 weeks. And that was a long period to not have anything. I mean, don't get me wrong. We had ways to entertain ourselves. We had television. We had some VHS tapes. Yeah, we were way back then. I had a Sega Genesis that we can only work a half hour at a time because it was waterlogged with saltwater damage. Though I get the feeling that the reason why my dad told me that was because he was trying to prevent me from playing video games too often.
So what would your day be like? You had chores, I'm sure, at some point.
Well, you'd be surprised. We'd wake up. A lot of our food would be probably prepped already. It would be like bread or some sandwiches or something like that. But Mom would be making breakfast, and she would be trying to find ways to change things up. Or if she was completely tired, like she probably was, Dad would make breakfast. We'd come up, and I would mostly be in charge of trying to entertain Mom and Dad while they were just watching the autopilot go. The most amount of chores that would really happen was like we'd have to adjust the sails, or we'd have to wash the boat when we get back. Like all the chores really only started when we were in port, because you can't really wash the boat when you're out at sea. Just mostly like maintaining your hygiene, maintaining your composure, and entertaining everybody is just a big part of your day. For a little kid, that seems like it takes forever, where there's just a whole lot of nothing going on. But we found ways to do stuff. Like I got into a habit of doing like a little improv theater with my sister on the deck that my parents would watch like a television set, because they couldn't really go downstairs and watch TV because they had to keep watch on the autopilot. They had to keep watch to see that we weren't going to accidentally run into something. But the nice thing is that we're going at such a speed that you could get away with it. You can get away with going downstairs, making yourself a sandwich, or watching something for like 5 minutes. We also had like a computer, but like my parents, their day-to-day activities were different. They had to do navigation. They had to gauge out the charts. They had to figure out our telemetry. They had to communicate with the other vessels in the convoy. They had to keep a vigilant lookout for any ships that might be crossing our paths. Because when a ship hits you to a point where you can see them on the horizon, that is unbelievably close. That is an event, and you got to make sure that they have no beef with you, or are just wanting to talk with you or something. Sometimes we've actually had bits of entertaining moments where we'd run into another vessel and we'd like organize a little bit of a fun event. Like I remember one time we had another vessel whose name is eluding me right now challenge us to a water balloon fight. I can't remember when this was, but I do remember that we got all of these water balloons prepped. We were ready to bomb them, and we get like really close to them, and none of us can throw at all. Every single water balloon does not make its mark and just falls off the wayside. So my dad has to come around and get even closer. And at one point, the other vessel had a bottle rocket with water balloons attached to it, and they hit our mast.
So there were kids in the other vessel as well.
There were kids in the other vessel. Like they were older than us. They were like in their preteens, but there were kids in the other vessel. And my dad called them up on the radio. It's like, I would just like to say, bravo. I think you might have hit my wind cups. I can't remember if we lost that instrument at some point during that point. I remember we did lose those wind cups later on during a storm.
Well, what was your next port after Marquesas?
Let me think, because my memory does get a little bit blurry around there. I actually used to have a map in my bedroom that showed like a list of all the places we went to.
How long did it take the whole trip? You said it may take 2 years. What did it wind up taking?
It took us about a year and a half.
And did you homeschool during that time, or?
Yeah, I did. I homeschooled during that time, where we did, I cannot remember the name of the homeschool, but like my mom and my dad would take turns teaching me and my sister. And we would read some really interesting things, like, a lot of books, like, it was like some knockoff of a Prairie Home Companion, where it was like people out in the wilderness, trying to survive and having their log hut and all that stuff. And, I think somebody got like the shivers or something at some point in the story. What was cool though was that we would learn about like ancient mythology and ancient history around the times we were in some of those locations. Like I learned about ancient Egypt when I was near Egypt, like when I was in the Red Sea. And we ended up finishing school pretty early. We actually ended up I ended up graduating 3rd and 4th grade about a year early. Because I got through the material so quickly because we would just go at it every day. By the time that we hit Indonesia, I was done. And so was my sister. And they didn't have any more material to use. So my parents wanted to reward me for doing such a good job and getting all that stuff done. But they were in Indonesia, and they weren't really sure what they could get us. So they would go to the store, and they bought me some Star Wars toys to be like, you did such a good job, you deserve a toy. And I as soon as I saw these toys, oh man. So I got a Luke Skywalker made out of a thick resin polymer where you could not bend his arms. He was literally just a rubber mold and stuck in a T-pose. And you needed to have like physical strength to bend this thing. And a Princess Leia doll that was so shoddily constructed, as soon as you'd bend any of her limbs, they would break off. And they were just as easy to like install or break off. So I just called her Break Apart Leia. I couldn't be mad at them. Like I was not mad. I distinctly remember I was not mad at them.
Well, probably
because I knew how difficult it must have been to get those toys.
To find it, yeah.
And to find that. It was... the thing about toys going around the world was that, like, you develop an unusual attachment to them. Mostly because, like, they're the only things you got. My sister and I, we would play all sorts of things together. Mostly, like, I would have my Star Wars toys, or whatever action figures I had, and my sister would have Pound Puppies, or rather the kitty version of the Pound Puppies. I think they called them Pound Purries, which is a god-awful name. My sister had 3 of them, but the one that I remember was Belios. I think she named them after the 3 cats from Aristocats. Belios was one of the 3 cats that we used to play with a lot. It was like this little tiny little toy kitten. And the reason why I'm bringing it up is because at one point, I think it was on our way to Australia, Belios fell overboard. And my sister screamed. She screamed in absolute terror that Belios fell overboard. My dad woke up because he was sleeping because my mom was on watch, scrambled all the way upstairs, was totally convinced that Kayla fell overboard. And she's crying, and my mom's cuddling with her, like holding her close. And we explained that Belios died, or Belios got lost at sea, and my dad just kind of rolls his eyes and just goes the fuck back downstairs. Pardon my French.
Back to sleep.
Just back to sleep. I mean, he was running on 3 hours. Like, at that point, I don't blame him. But my sister treated that like it was the loss of a loved one. And to be honest, I was feeling it too. Because even though I was a lot older, we grew attached to these stupid toys. We built stories out of them. We built lives out of them. We had this whole background with this character. And when we got to Australia later on, my mom managed to find a whole kit, or rather a whole like set of like these kitties, and like even like a bigger puppy one or something like that. And they had this. They weaved. My mom weaved this ridiculous story of how the dolphins rescued her and rescued Belios and brought him to Santa, and Santa found a way to bring them to us. And it was one of those kind of things where, like, as a kid, we just did not question it. It really showed how much that Mom and Dad cared about us. Even when they were waterlogged, dead tired, running on 3 hours of sleep a day, maybe less, they never stopped caring about how we were feeling about any given situation.
I'm Kyle. This is Steven. Together we host a show called Boy Meets World. Tell them what we cover on Boy Meets World. Boy Meets World. But that's not all, is it? No. No, we cover life experiences, art. Oh, son of a... Alright, just check out the show, please. We really need it. Okay? We need a win. Just check us out. We talk about the show Boy Meets World. Each episode of our show, we run parallel with an episode of Boy Meets World where we will examine the show. That's way too much. What happens, you know, our life, how it relates to it, experiences. I can't believe you're still recording. I am recording it. Check it out, guys. You'll get some hilarious stories from me and Steven from our childhood. You'll get a great... I lost it.
Was there anything that you learned during that trip that that's come in handy later in life, maybe as an adult?
I learned very quickly that life is not going to be an endless parade of events that exist solely for the purpose of entertaining me. So I learned to appreciate introspection. I learned to appreciate being in my own head and learning and playing with stories and ideas and so on and so forth. I learned about humility because I had nearly died about 3 times, one of which was for a very stupid reason. More into that in a bit. But I think the one lesson that I learned greater than anything, it's probably one of my favorite stories to tell. I'm trying to remember what island we were on. It was either Vanuatu or Rarotonga or one of those. But I remember we were heading into town on the boat. We had to use a dinghy to go over to dump off all of our garbage. The town had stilts on all the houses. They had 2-story blocks for that. When flooding would come in, you could just go up to the 2nd floor. And I was walking with my dad, and a bunch of the people in the town came up to us and asked us to take their garbage. They were all children. I was confused. My dad was like, all right, whatever. And he handed them the bags, and the kids ran off. And they ripped the bags apart, and they started harvesting all the junk that was in there, and they took a carton of milk and started playing soccer with it. And my dad didn't look at it like there was never a point where we looked at that derisively, but more of just, wow, we really take things for granted. My dad looks down at me and said, well, I mean, that's different, right? And my response was, what right do I have to complain about anything? I'm halfway around the world on a boat with what I thought was nothing, but the little tiny things, having a milk carton, having running water readily available, having filtered water readily available, even just having a bed space I could call my own and no one else's, even if it was just next to the anchor room. It really helped me come to terms with the fact of how unbelievably privileged I am, and how I should never take that for granted. The ultimate conclusion I came from that, aside from, how unbelievably privileged I am, was when it comes to people from around the world, more oftentimes than not, they're just living a different culture than I am. They have a different lifestyle, they have different priorities, they have different perspectives. Just because it doesn't match with mine doesn't mean that I can't make a friend out of them. And it doesn't mean that we can't get along either. I mean, don't get me wrong, there were some people that were absolutely horrible in the time that I met them, but more oftentimes than not, strangers turned out to be pretty friendly, and I was lucky for that. And it helps give me a much more optimistic view on the human race in general. Almost ignorantly optimistic, I suppose, by some people's criticism.
Well, what were some of your near-death experiences? Were they on this trip?
Let's see. There were a couple of stories where it was just the here and there, and that's it. There were the 2 times that we went into a monsoon, or rather, sorry, a typhoon is the right term. It's like a hurricane in the Pacific. Our instruments got scrambled, and we ended up going through it twice. Either that, or it turned around and started chasing after us. At least that's what my parents claimed happened. There was the time that we were in a resort, anchored, and the anchor got wrapped twice around a catamaran and was about to collide with them and sink. And the only person that was on the boat at the time was my mom. So we had to take the dinghy and try to push them apart when I and a friend of mine had discovered that my mom was bridging these 2 ships apart with her body. I think the reason why everybody was gone was that they were all going to celebrate a birthday party, and my mom just wanted to stay in for, have a nice day to herself. Funny how that turned out. But yeah, the 2 ones that were more in direct relation to me was, we were on a random nameless island. It was I believe it was uninhabited. We were just mooring there to get some shelter for the night and just be anchored there and just take a break from sailing. And we were with Ocean's Dream and a couple of other vessels. And we all went down to the beach and started spending some time. And I started walking with my dad to the other side of the island where there was this big sprawling coral reef that actually had surfaced slightly at low tide. So, being the adventurous kid that I was, I walked out into onto all the rocks to look out as far as I could. And it was around that point that high tide started to come in, and it came in fast. So I had to kind of play hopscotch with these slippery reef-like rocks covered in algae, and a wave flowed over the whole thing, knocked into me, and I fell into these nooks and crannies full of sharp coral, and I started floating through around the whole thing, and I got beaten to within an inch of my life. My dad was ready to jump in, even though that these nooks or rather these flues were too narrow for him to fit into. But eventually I managed to grab on with my bare hands onto the shore and yank myself back up. And I was covered in cuts. I was bleeding everywhere. I was crying, and I had to get walked back, and we tried to make a more pleasant day of it, because we didn't have enough bandages for me to patch me up or anything like that, so we just had to wash me down and make sure I didn't get infected. The other one was entirely, emphatically my fault. So, at one point, when we were nearing the end of our journey, I wanted to celebrate. I wanted to entertain people and be really exciting and stuff like that. So we went to a restaurant to eat, and it was one of those fancy restaurants in Florida. It was like the last thing that we were going to do before we go home. And I told the waiter that I wanted to entertain people, and I'm going to put on a show. And they're like, well, what kind of show are you going to do? It's like, well, we're going to be sailing out, and I'm going to do something to entertain everybody. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to strap a harness to myself, get raised up, and fly around while we played the Macarena or whatever, because apparently that was a song that we still had. My parents were supportive of it, even if they thought it was a bad idea. And they started hoisting me up, and I started doing it. Nobody could hear the music because we had this crummy little stereo system downstairs. My sister kind of stared at me dejectedly, almost like she was just like, this is such a terrible idea. And at one point, when I was about to slide off from the dance, the harness snapped and wrapped twice around my neck. And I almost hung myself.
It's terrifying.
I mean, if you saw my face, it was like absolute terror. And my sister kind of looked over at my parents like, Mom, I think Kennedy's choking.
Well, you may think that history is vaguely interesting. The truth is, it's fun and metal AF.
Echoes of the past are still reverberating through our world today, and Body Count is here to show you how our shared history affects your life on the daily.
Whether you know it or not. So, are you past the point of higher education?
Feel like you didn't learn anything from your high school history teacher?
Or just didn't give a flying crap about it?
Are you tired of always missing out on the yellow history pie piece in Trivial Pursuit?
Are you the horror of all your friends' game nights?
Did you once proudly announce that Napoleon Bonaparte was a super short little nutsack?
When in reality, he was an average-sized nutsack.
Have you been thinking about living under a faulty dam?
Or perhaps an active volcano?
Well, we have good news. It's not too late for you or your homeowner's insurance.
Come on over and listen to Body Count, the podcast that explores death and disaster through the ages with only one rule.
Someone, or usually a lot of someone's, dies.
Because history doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes.
A proud member of the MSE Podcast Network.
So, we were part of this round the world rally. It was actually like this service where these people would be like, hey, give us some money and we will help get you these inlets to go to and help guide you along the way. And long story short, it was a complete ripoff. And through too many events that I can really enumerate now, at this point, my dad found a way to break out of it and get some of his money back. Because the whole thing was such a mess. So we went off on our own, and we ended up going to the Red Sea instead of down under South Africa. We didn't want to do South Africa because the storms would get pretty bad down there, would get pretty cold as well, or at least that's what we thought. So we figured going up through the Red Sea would be less problematic in the late 90s. So we hit a couple of areas there. We hit Yemen, we hit Djibouti, we hit Sudan. But the moment that I remember the most was when we got to Suez. Suez is a inlet. It's a canal that bridges the Arabian Peninsula with Egypt, and it helps you open from the Red Sea into the Mediterranean Sea. We needed to go through there, and we had been sailing for an unbelievably long time, and we arrived at around 5:30 in the morning at Suez. We were all exhausted. We were all completely worn out. And we could have sworn that we were hallucinating, because we saw a portly man in pajamas with bunny slippers approach us with Dunkin' Donuts. And he says, "Welcome to Egypt. I'm the Prince of the Red Sea." In truth, he ran an insurance company that in order for you to go through the Suez, you need to have sailing vessels that you represent. They have a representative locally before they're allowed to go through. Now, all these agencies were competing massively for approval. So they would bribe, they would try to make you feel as comfortable with them as possible, because getting an American vessel across the Suez was a big deal, because it meant that you could be trusted with really big stuff. And a lot of times those trade vessels and stuff, like sometimes they want to see like, well, if you've dealt with Americans, then, well, all right. And he invited us into his home. He showed us his big birds. He gave us his birds as a gift. He gave us all these treats and prizes and things like that. And he gave us tickets to visit Cairo and actually see the pyramids. And I got to tell you, seeing the pyramids was the most conflicting experience. Because we get there, and across the street from the Sphinx is a Pizza Hut. And I checked. From what I understand, that Pizza Hut is still there after all these years. You go to the pyramids, and it is an absolute tourist trap. There are people from all over the world trying to get photos of them next to the pyramids. And they even invite you to go into the pyramid and tour around, which is like, you get in your head about like scenes from like The Mummy or Indiana Jones. Like, oh, that sounds so exciting. But you go in there, and the tunnel is so narrow. I was like 10 years old when I went in, and I was almost too big to fit in it. My dad had to hunch over and like crouch down to crawl inside, and you get all the way in there, and there are all these different areas that are locked off, like with bars and stuff, and are not letting anybody go through, but they have one room that you go into, and you go inside, and it is an empty, large, blank space with a stone bathtub that I assume used to be a sarcophagus, and a sign with a camera that says, "Do not take any pictures." My dad took 3. Because I think he was just so frustrated at that point. He's like, "No, not a hell with you. I came all the way here. I'm taking some pictures." We did get to go to the Egyptian Museum and a couple of other places, but I think it was just the idea that like going to the pyramids and just having it so stripped bare, it was like legitimately frustrating. Which was funny because like at one point we got out and they're like, "Hey, there's another pyramid that's even larger that costs more money to go in. That's also the same exact experience." My dad's like, "I think I'll pass."
Done one pyramid, you've done them all.
Apparently so.
Well, let's talk about your art, your audio drama, and what you do. Are you a writer?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I went into the film industry hoping that I could, make a movies one day. At least help make them. I started with post production because I found I had a knack for editing, like editing the story after the fact. But storytelling never went away from me. Even after like this whole big journey, I grew to appreciate the value of those kinds of stories, even if you just spoke them aloud. But working with other people for a while, I started to feel that antsiness and frustration that I wanted to tell my own story. So I eventually buckled down, put a lot of my savings into trying to make my first directed experience, which was Magus Elgar. It was an audio drama. I was inspired by the works of Terry Pratchett. He wrote Discworld and Good Omens, if you're familiar with that TV show that just came out. And it was a hit. Like, I took a lot of my experiences into playing around with the world and trying to explore all these different ideas behind magic and how things were done, because I wanted to try something a little bit different than just like, well, magic is just a thing and then it just happens. I wanted to find some kind of explanation behind it. But yeah, the premise of it is it's about Magus Elgar, a magical troubleshooter, working with his apprentice, Udo Malaki, and two scientists from the dimension of Earth to hunt something called stamps, scientific tools augmented with magical power, trying to find a way to stabilize them before they rip all of reality apart, or at least before people find out that they're the ones that made them.
What's it called again?
It's called Magus Elgar. It's available wherever audiobooks are sold. We actually have a website where you can find a link of like where everything is if you just go to maguselgar.com. We've been nominated for Best Original Work by the Audio Publishers Association. We've gotten a couple of accolades, like we got a Telly Award for some of our work on the project. And it's about 11 episodes, and it's great for drives. And yes, it is perfectly safe for children. It is designed for the big kid at heart. And it's all about magic and stuff, so, you know, that's always fun.